The rocking horse I carved for my son still stands in the corner of the living room. Its painted eyes, a deep sapphire blue just like my late Eleanor's, have watched 50 years of life unfold from that spot. Ilara, my daughter-in-law, called it a charming piece of firewood last Tuesday, her voice as polished and cold as the marble countertop she wants to install. I saw the way her eyes scanned it, not with nostalgia, but with the flat, calculating gaze of an auctioneer. How do you explain to someone that they are trying to sell a piece of your soul? The silence in this house has grown teeth since Eleanor passed, and lately it feels like it's starting to chew. It was the first time I realized she didn't see a home. She saw inventory. It's a strange feeling watching your life get appraised. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My son Leo just sat there on the worn velvet armchair, the one Eleanor always claimed molded perfectly to her spine, and said nothing. He stared at his hands, watching his thumbs chase each other in pointless circles, a habit he's had since he was a boy afraid of the dark. Now, it seems, he's afraid of his own wife. The afternoon sun cut through the dusty air, illuminating the family portraits on the mantelpiece, generations of faces smiling, serious, alive. Ilara followed my gaze and offered a thin smile. We'll have to get those digitized. They'd fetch a pretty penny from a collector, you know, the frames alone. I felt a cold dread coil in my stomach, a quiet, creeping thing that steals the warmth from your limbs. It wasn't just about the money, it was about erasure. She wanted to digitize memories, sell off history, and strip this house down to its bare, profitable bones. I finally found my voice a little rough from disuse. Eleanor loved those pictures. She said they were our anchors. Ilara's smile didn't waver. Eleanor was a sentimental woman. We have to be practical now, William. For the family's future. The way she said family felt like a threat. A circle drawn around her and Leo, with me standing on the outside. We've all seen people change when inheritance is on the line, but I never thought it would be my own son. Leo flinched when she said his mother's name, but still, he remained silent. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept watching his thumbs, as if the fate of the world rested in their meaningless chase. I looked at him, my boy, the same one who used to ride that rocking horse for hours, his laughter echoing off these very walls. Now the only echo was the chasm of his silence. What would you have done if your own son just sat there? The conversation, if you could call it that, drifted to the will reading. My will. Ilara spoke of it with a chilling efficiency, outlining plans for the estate, for investments, for liquidating assets. She used words like optimization and legacy structuring. I just heard the sound of a bulldozer. The reading is tomorrow at 10, she stated, not asked. Our lawyer has everything in order. You just need to show up. There was a finality in her tone, a warning. Don't interfere. Don't make this difficult. I gripped the arms of my chair, the wood smooth and cool beneath my palms. I've made my own preparations, I said, my voice steady, far steadier than I felt. Ilara's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a flicker of annoyance. But it was Leo who finally looked up, his face a mask of exhausted sorrow. He spoke, and his words were the first true blow, the one that cracked the foundation. Dad, he said, his voice soft, pleading. Just let us handle it. Please, you're getting confused these days. Confusion. The word hung in the air between us, thicker and more suffocating than a century of dust. It was an ugly word, a clinical word, a weapon disguised as a kindness. Leo wouldn't look at me, but Ilara did. She watched me with an unnerving stillness, like a biologist studying a specimen waiting to see how I would react to the poison she'd just had my son administer. How do you fight a ghost they've invented for you? I didn't answer him. I simply stood up, the old joints in my knees groaning in protest. The sound was loud in the heavy silence. I walked past them, past the rocking horse, past the portraits of my smiling ancestors, and went up the stairs. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Betrayal isn't a sharp, sudden pain. It's a slow bleed, a warmth you don't even realize you're losing until you're left cold and empty. Upstairs in the study Eleanor and I had shared, the scent of old paper and lemon polish still lingered. It was the only room Alara hadn't yet tried to modernize. I ran my hand over the dark cherry wood of the desk, feeling the familiar nicks and scratches. Each one was a memory. Leo spilling a bottle of ink when he was 7, Eleanor drumming her fingers while balancing the checkbook, the scuff mark where I'd dropped a heavy dictionary. These weren't just things. They were witnesses. My gaze fell on the silver-framed photo on the corner of the desk. It was Eleanor and me on our wedding day. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a stray curl escaping her veil. I remembered the sound of that laugh, how it could fill a room and chase away any shadow. I could hear it now, a faint echo in the quiet of the house. A house that was no longer quiet, but silenced. There's a difference. Silence is peaceful. Silenced is an act of violence. My phone buzzed on the desk, a jarring intrusion. The name on the screen was Philip, my bank manager for the last 30 years. I answered, my voice a little hoarse. "William," he started, his tone professionally pleasant, but with an undercurrent of something else. Hesitation. "I'm just calling for a routine confirmation. I received a request from your daughter-in-law, Alara, to be added as a primary signatory on your accounts. She cited concerns about your faculties and sent over a power of attorney document for our legal to review." The cold dread from downstairs returned, this time with an icy grip. They hadn't just spoken the words, they had acted on them. They were building a cage of legal documents around me, painting me as incompetent, senile, confused. She was moving faster than I ever imagined. Do you think I was weak for not confronting them right then and there? Maybe. But a cornered animal is predictable. A quiet man with a plan is not. "Philip," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I want you to freeze that request immediately. Do not grant anyone access to anything. I will be in touch with my lawyer, Mr. Davies, and he will send over formal instructions." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet, "Of course, William. I'm glad I called." I hung up and stared at the phone. She thought I was a relic, a piece of firewood to be discarded. She had no idea the fire wasn't out yet. My son's betrayal was a wound, but hers was a declaration of war. She wasn't just trying to take my money. She was trying to take my name, my mind, my past. She wanted to erase me before I was even gone. I made another call, this one to a number I knew by heart. "Davies," a gruff voice answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said. No other explanation was needed. He knew. "The reading is tomorrow at 10, I told him. "Be there at 9:30 and bring it." There was a rustle of papers on his end. "Are you certain, William? Once this is done, there's no going back." I looked at the photo of Eleanor, at her laughing face, at the life we had built in this house. A life they were trying to auction off piece by piece. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. "She thinks this is her victory. She has no idea what she's walking into." After the call, I felt a pull toward the old bookshelf, the one filled with Eleanor's poetry collections. I ran my fingers along the spines, stopping on a worn copy of Whitman. It had been her favorite. I pulled it from the shelf, and as I did, a small square photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was a picture I hadn't seen in years. A young Leo, no older than 5, sitting proudly on the rocking horse. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood another boy, slightly older, with the same dark hair but different eyes, a shy smile on his face. Tucked behind the photo was a small piece of folded brittle paper. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was Eleanor's handwriting, a note I'd forgotten she ever wrote. It contained only 2 lines, a secret we had sworn to keep until the time was right. Suddenly, the time was right. The morning of the will reading dawned gray and listless, the sky the color of old dishwater. I stood by the window in my study, the small, folded note from Eleanor clutched in my hand, its edges soft as cloth. The paper felt charged with a quiet energy, a final whisper from the past. Regret is a strange companion. It doesn't shout, it murmurs. It sits with you in the quiet hours and asks questions you can't answer. Had I been a fool to keep this secret for so long? Eleanor and I thought we were protecting them, protecting everyone. We thought love could build a bridge over any truth. Now I saw that some truths aren't chasms to be bridged. They are canyons, and you either learn to fly or you fall. Downstairs I could hear the murmur of voices. Ilara's was crisp and clear, the clink of her heels on the hardwood floor punctuating her sentences like periods. Leo's was a low, indistinct rumble, the sound of a man trying to disappear into the background. I could taste the metallic tang of anxiety in the back of my throat, the same taste I'd had waiting for news from the doctor the day Eleanor passed. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer, pushing aside starched handkerchiefs and old collar stays. My fingers found the cool, smooth surface of a small lacquered box. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was my father's pocket watch. It wasn't gold or fancy, just heavy, dependable steel. I wound it slowly, the series of soft clicks a comforting ritual. Each tick was a second, each second a moment, and I knew that moments were all I had left to control. When I came downstairs, they were in the dining room, seated at the long mahogany table Eleanor used to polish every Saturday. Ilara was at the head, in my chair, a sheaf of papers spread before her like a general planning a campaign. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of polite impatience. "William, good. We were just waiting for you." She gestured to the chair beside her, a place of honor that felt more like a cage. Leo was already there, his head down, tracing the grain of the wood with his finger. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. I didn't sit. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, at the roses Eleanor had planted, now heavy with rain. "My lawyer will be here shortly," I said, my back to them. "We will wait for him." Ilara's sigh was a small, sharp hiss. "That's unnecessary. Our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, is perfectly capable of handling this. It's all very straightforward." "What would you do in a moment like that, when they've decided your part in your own life is over?" I turned from the window, my gaze steady. "Nevertheless, we will wait." The tension in the room was a physical thing, a pressure against my eardrums. We stood in that silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the doorbell chimed, a bright, clear sound that shattered the stillness. Ilara started to rise, but I held up a hand. "I'll get it." At the door stood Mr. Davies, a man who looked exactly like his voice sounded, gruff, solid, immovable. He was holding an old leather briefcase worn at the corners, and he gave me a curt nod. "William." "Davies," I said, stepping aside to let him in. I led him into the dining room. Ilara's eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, a flicker of surprise she couldn't quite conceal. Henderson, her lawyer, a slick young man with too much gel in his hair, stood up to shake Davies' hand, a gesture Davies pointedly ignored. "Let's get started," Davies said, setting his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. He didn't sit. He stood beside me, a silent, imposing ally. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read from the document Ilara had prepared, a version of my will that was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering, leaving the bulk of the estate under Leo's stewardship, with Ilara as executor. It was airtight, professional, and a complete fabrication. He droned on, his voice smooth and practiced, but I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching my son. Leo stared at the table, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped his hands together. He looked like a man at his own execution. When Henderson finished, there was a triumphant gleam in Ilara's eyes. She turned to me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is hard, William, but it's what's best for the family's legacy." Davies stepped forward. "That document is a fine piece of fiction," he said, his voice a low growl. "But it is not William's will. This is." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sealed envelope, its paper yellowed with age. He placed it on the table in front of me. "This is the only legally binding last will and testament, and it has a rather unique addendum." Ilara laughed, a short, ugly sound. "What is this? Some sort of desperate theater? We have power of attorney. We have medical evaluations. He's not competent." Davies smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Competency is a matter for a judge to decide. But paternity," he said, his eyes locking with Ilara's, "is a matter of biology." He slid another document from his briefcase, not old and yellowed, but crisp, white, and clinical, bearing the letterhead of a genetics lab. He laid it on the table beside the will. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "changes everything." The sight of that lab report on the polished mahogany table sucked the air out of the room. It lay there, white and clinical, an alien object amidst the antique furniture and stale grief. Ilara stared at it, her mask of cool composure finally cracking. A flicker of genuine shock, raw and unguarded, crossed her face before she quickly suppressed it. She looked from the paper to me, then to Davies, her eyes narrowed with suspicion and dawning fury. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What game are you playing, William? Is this your idea of a final senile prank?" She didn't get it yet. She saw a tactic, a legal maneuver. She couldn't comprehend that it was a truth, one that had been sleeping for over 40 years. Leo, however, seemed to understand instantly. He wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking at me, his eyes wide with a new and terrifying kind of dread. The dread of a man standing on a cliff edge he never knew was there. It was the quiet, horrified shock of someone realizing the entire foundation of their life was a lie. He knew on some primal level what that paper meant for him. Davies didn't speak. He simply reached out a weathered hand and slid the document across the table until it stopped directly in front of Leo. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of our old life falling away. "Read it, son," I said, my voice softer than I intended. The word son felt strange on my tongue, a habit I wasn't sure I still had the right to. Leo's hands trembled as he reached for the report. He fumbled with the staple in the corner, his fingers clumsy. Ilara shot up from her chair. "Don't you dare touch that. Henderson, this is harassment. He's clearly not of sound mind." Her lawyer, Henderson, looked flustered, caught completely off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly out of his depth. He was a shark in a swimming pool, and Davies had just dropped him in the middle of the ocean. My lawyer finally spoke, his voice calm and lethal. "The document is a legally certified DNA comparison analysis, commissioned by my client 6 weeks ago. It is perfectly admissible. I suggest you let him read it." Leo's eyes scanned the page, moving back and forth, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. I could see the exact moment the words registered. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, grayish white. He swayed slightly in his chair, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a choked gasp. He looked up at me, his face a canvas of utter devastation. "It says," he whispered, his voice cracking, broken. "It says, I'm not—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The truth was there, hanging between us, a brutal, undeniable fact. He was not my biological son. Ilara snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes, sharp and quick, devoured the text. I watched her process the information, denial, confusion, and then a slow, dawning horror as the implications crashed down on her. Her entire plan, her meticulously built future, was based on a single fundamental assumption: Leo's blood right. And that foundation had just crumbled into dust. She sank back into her chair, the report fluttering from her limp fingers onto the table. "No," she breathed. "It's a fake. It has to be a fake. Eleanor, She would never, but her voice lacked conviction. The certainty was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked scrambling. She was a chess master who had just had the board kicked over. Eleanor and I made a choice a long time ago, I said, the confession feeling like a physical weight leaving my body. Her first husband, a good man named Thomas, died in a car accident just 2 months after they were married. Eleanor was already pregnant. When she and I met a year later, we fell in love. I adopted Leo when he was born. I gave him my name. I raised him as my own. In every way that matters, he is my son. I paused, letting the words settle. But in the eyes of the law, and the strict language of my father's trust from which this entire estate is derived, inheritance passes only through the bloodline. This was the twist, the hidden machinery beneath everything. It wasn't just my will. It was the ironclad terms of a trust established 2 generations ago. A detail Ilara, in all her rapacious research, had missed. She thought she was fighting a confused old man. She had no idea she was fighting my grandfather's ghost and the unbending will of the law. The trust is explicit, Davies added, his tone grimly satisfied. No non-biological issue may inherit controlling interest. Leo is entitled to a generous stipend, but the estate, the properties, the company shares, they do not pass to him. Ilara's head snapped up, her face a mask of fury. The shock was gone, replaced by pure venomous rage. "You did this," she hissed at me. "You sat back and let him believe his entire life just so you could pull this stunt now? To cut him out? To cut us out?" Before I could answer, a door at the far end of the dining room creaked open. We all turned. Standing in the doorway was a man in his late 40s, his hair dark like Leo's, but his eyes a familiar sapphire blue. He looked nervous but resolute, his hands clutching a worn leather satchel. He looked at me, then at Leo, his expression a mixture of apology and sorrow. It was Richard, Thomas's younger brother, the boy from the photograph. And according to the second DNA test I'd commissioned, Leo's only living blood relative. Richard's appearance in the doorway was like a match thrown into a room full of gasoline. The tension, already suffocating, ignited into sheer, chaotic disbelief. Ilara stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to place this new, impossible piece on the board. Henderson, her lawyer, looked utterly lost, his slick confidence now a puddle on the floor. But it was Leo who had the most profound reaction. He looked at Richard, at the familiar dark hair, the unfamiliar blue eyes that mirrored the ones on the rocking horse, and a lifetime of fragmented, half-understood memories seemed to crash down on him at once. I saw a flicker of recognition, not of a man, but of a ghost from his earliest childhood. The shock on his face was absolute, a profound shattering of identity that went far beyond inheritance or money. Who was he, if not my son? Who was this stranger who shared his blood? Who are you? Leo stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He wasn't speaking to Richard. He was speaking to me, his eyes pleading for an answer that would somehow make sense of the wreckage. Before I could speak, Richard stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Leo. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "My name is Richard Miller. Your father, your biological father, Thomas, was my older brother." Each word was a careful, deliberate blow. Ilara finally found her voice, a shrill, incredulous shriek. "This is a circus. You hired an actor. I knew it. William, you are a manipulative, cruel old man. This is insane." She rounded on her lawyer. "Henderson, do something. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud." But Henderson was already gathering his papers, his face pale. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. He was a creature of contracts and clauses, not of long-buried family tragedies and surprise DNA reveals. "My client's position is compromised," he mumbled, avoiding Ilara's furious gaze. "We will need to reevaluate." "Reevaluate?" she spat. "They're stealing everything." I ignored her, my attention focused on Leo. The rage I had expected from him wasn't there. It had been replaced by a deep, hollow grief, the look of a man who had lost everything, including himself. "Why?" he asked me, his voice aching with betrayal. All these years? Why did you lie to me? I finally sat down, feeling the immense weight of the last 50 years settle on my shoulders. It wasn't a lie, Leo. It was a promise I made to your mother. My voice was heavy with regret. She loved Thomas, and his death devastated her. But she loved you more. She was terrified you'd grow up feeling like you were half an orphan, caught between a dead father and a new one. We decided I would be your father, in every sense. No shadows, no ghosts. We thought we were giving you a solid foundation, a life without that confusion. I looked at him, hoping he could see the truth in my eyes. I never for one second felt you were anything less than my own son. That has never changed. Do you think I was wrong to keep that secret? Perhaps. But love makes you do things you believe are for the best, even if they unravel decades later. The quiet dread in the room was now a living entity. It was the sound of a family breaking apart, not with a bang, but with the terrible grinding finality of tectonic plates shifting. Richard spoke again, his voice soft, directed only at Leo. Leo, I'm not here to take anything. I needed to see you. Our parents are gone. It's just us. When your grandfather's lawyer contacted me, I didn't even know where you were. He opened his satchel and pulled out a faded, dog-eared photograph. It was of a young couple laughing, standing by a small car. The man had Leo's jawline. The woman had Richard's sapphire eyes. This is them, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is your father, Thomas, and my mother. I thought you should have it. He held it out, not as a claim, but as an offering, a piece of a past Leo never knew he had. Leo stared at the picture, at the faces of these strangers who were his blood, and something inside him seemed to collapse. He buried his face in his hands and his shoulders began to shake with silent, racking sobs. The sound was the most painful thing I had ever heard, worse than any shout of anger. It was the sound of a man's entire world dissolving. Ilara watched him, but for the first time there was no calculation in her eyes. There was only the cold, hard realization of absolute defeat. She had lost. Her plans, her manipulations, her future, all of it had turned to ash. She looked from her weeping husband to the stranger holding the photograph, to the implacable old man who had orchestrated it all. Her face hardened, the brief flicker of humanity gone, replaced by a chillingly empty resolve. She slowly picked up her purse from the floor, her movements stiff and deliberate. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at Leo again. She simply turned and walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing in the heartbroken silence. The front door opened, then shut with a soft, final click. She was gone. The sound of the front door closing was unnervingly soft, a whisper instead of the slam I'd expected. It wasn't an act of fury. It was an act of surrender. Ilara wasn't just leaving the room. She was leaving the game. She had assessed the board, seen no possible move to victory, and simply walked away. The family betrayal was complete, but not in the way she had planned. She had intended to betray me, but in the end, she betrayed my son by abandoning him in the wreckage she helped create. Leo didn't even seem to notice she was gone. He was still hunched over, his face in his hands, lost in a storm of grief and confusion. Richard stood awkwardly a few feet away, the photograph still extended in his hand, a bridge to a past Leo wasn't ready to cross. The room was thick with unspoken words, with 50 years of secrets and sorrow. I looked at the boy I raised, my son in heart, if not in blood, and felt a profound ache. I had won. I had protected my legacy and Eleanor's memory from Ilara's greed. But the victory felt hollow, the price devastatingly high. I had saved the house, but shattered the home. What happens now? Leo finally whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and lost. He wasn't asking about the money or the estate. He was asking who he was supposed to be now. What was his life, if not the one he had always known? Now, I said, my voice quiet but firm, we begin to tell the truth. I turned to Mr. Davies. The addendum to my will. Please read it. Davies, who had been a silent, stoic observer, nodded. He picked up the old yellowed envelope, broke the wax seal with his thumb, and unfolded the single page within. It was Eleanor's handwriting, elegant and clear, written just a few months before she passed. He began to read aloud. Should the terms of the ancestral trust be invoked, disinheriting my beloved son Leo from the main estate, it is my final and most urgent wish that the entirety of my personal holdings, my portfolio, my jewelry, and the contents of my private accounts be transferred to him immediately. It is not a fortune, but it is his. I leave it to him not as an inheritance, but as a mother's apology for the secret we kept to protect him. May he use it to build a life on his own terms, defined not by bloodlines, but by the strength of his own heart. He is, and always will be, my son. The room was utterly still. Leo stared at me, his expression unreadable. The anger was gone, the raw grief softened by a wave of shock. It was a final message from his mother, a loving hand reaching out from the past to steady him. Richard slowly lowered the photograph, a look of quiet understanding on his face. He wasn't an invader. He was just a man carrying a story that needed to be told. The DNA test was a weapon I had been forced to use, but Eleanor's letter, that was the beginning of a cure. I stood and walked over to Leo. I didn't touch him. I just stood beside his chair. She loved you, Leo. We both did. We made a complicated choice, maybe the wrong one, but it was born from love. Ilara's greed forced this to light. The pain you feel now, that is on her, and it is on me. But the man you are, the good man you became, you built that. I was just proud to watch. He finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of the boy I raised, not the hollow man his wife had shaped. He slowly reached out and took the photograph from Richard's hand, his fingers tracing the outline of the stranger with his jawline. He wasn't rejecting a past or accepting a new one. He was just looking. I turned to Richard. Thank you for coming. This was not easy. He nodded, his sapphire eyes, Eleanor's eyes, filled with a sad empathy. He's my brother, he said simply. There was nothing more to say. The legal battle was over. The emotional one was just beginning. It would be a long road. There were decades of silence to unpack, a new family to discover, and a life to rebuild from the ground up. I didn't know if Leo would ever forgive me, not completely. I didn't know if he and Richard would ever be true brothers. But as I looked at the two of them, one holding a piece of his lost past, the other a witness to it, I felt a flicker of hope. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't a silence of violence or dread. It was a silence of possibility. The lesson here is that a family built on a secret, even one intended for protection, is a house built on sand. Sooner or later, the tide of truth will come in, and you'll find out what's truly holding you up. Sometimes the most loving act is not to shield someone from the truth, but to give them the strength to face it. Tell me in the comments, do you believe keeping a secret like this can ever be justified by love? And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that uncover the truths we try to hide.